Hello and welcome to my presentation on solid-state electrolytes. My name is Devendra Sarnaik and I have worked on this project for the Energy and Transport Sciences Laboratory for the Purdue ME Summer Projects. The motivation for this project was there's a greater need for batteries in cars and industries as we are going forward in the future. Companies like Tesla have popped up, but to perform these tasks efficiently, these batteries need to be capable of fast charging. However, the mechanism fast charging requires good lithium-ion transfer mechanisms within the cell. Traditional cells use liquid electrolytes, which have weaker ionic conductivity, which therefore means weaker lithium-ion transport. And solid-state electrolytes, SSEs, are inherently safer as there's no liquid that can move around and cause a short easily. However, solid-state electrolytes, which is inherently SPE, solid polymer electrolytes, have good safety characteristics, but weak mechanical properties as well as very weak ionic conductivity. Therefore, we have to look towards another alternative, which is CPEs, composite polymer electrolytes, which uses the simplicity of making polymer electrolytes with the superior ionic conductivity of ceramics, and combining those two, we get CPEs. The aim of this project is to successfully create thin polymer electrolytes and then make the synthesis process simpler. The specific goals are that we're going to try to create a SSE film that is between 50 and 100 microns in thickness. The film itself must not have any imperfections, must not have any holes, must not have any impurities, so that it can be tested in a coin cell. And the film must be this low to match the thickness of a liquid electrolyte, otherwise it would not be as efficient since it's so much thicker. The films must also be cast on a medium that it can be easily removed from, so therefore effective casting methods need to be developed. The initial method for making this polymer electrolyte film was to use the LiTFSI salt and PEO, which is polyethylene oxide, those two solids, dissolve them in a solvent and in a temperature bath, and get a slurry. And after you get that slurry, we would then deposit it onto a machine called a doctor blade, which you see on the image here. And that doctor blade would then drag the slurry across based on the thickness that we set it on. And the issue that arose with this is that it relies a lot on consistent viscosity. However, since the solvent that was used initially in the first few experiments that we did, the solvent proportion varied heavily, therefore the viscosity was different each time. So there resulted in inconsistent thickness from batch to batch and on one end of the film to the another end of the film. Therefore, there was a massive variation in thickness resulting from this method, which would not result in good consistent results in a coin cell. Another method that we tried was that we definitely wanted to not have bubbles or holes when we pour it. Therefore, we tried to do something called speed mixing, which is in concept simply like a centrifuge, but just for one of those vials that the slurry was stored in. However, this for some reason just introduced more bubbles in it, so whenever you do cast it, the bubbles would pop and the film would be full of holes, which would render it useless. Therefore, we stopped using speed mixing and simply letting it sit. And also while letting it sit, we also let it have a higher solvent content, making the slurry less viscous and thinner. And with this thinner slurry, the bubbles can then rise to the surface on its own, resulting in a slurry that doesn't have bubbles, and when you cast it, it'll have a nice even film. And the result of that can be seen on these two pictures. On the left is a metal spacer with the actual cut film on it, and on the right is a picture that I took within the glove box of a film that I recently cut. And as you can see on the film, there are no imperfections, there are no impurities, and it is a nice circular disc. The films must also be cut within an argon environment in a sealed glove box, otherwise the lithium salt will react to the air. Also, I measured each thickness of each cut disc to see how that would affect the properties of each coin cell. And the final method that we used to get really consistent films was to use something called Teflon evaporating dishes. The solvent ratio, as mentioned before, was changed from 8 to 1 to 12 to 1, which means the 8 to 1 is 8 to 1 ratio of solvent to solids to make the slurry thinner. This, as mentioned before, allows for easier pouring into the mold and also reducing the bubbles. The Teflon dishes were also chosen as they have a nice standard circular area, which allows for standard film size for batch to batch. When in the future we want to reduce the thickness of the film, we would simply reduce the amount of solvent used, as now the area is standard. And we're also in the future going to try to reduce the chance of the film sticking to each other by increasing the curing time so that we get a nice solid film. However, we can't simply increase the curing temperature, as the solvent would start to boil, as it is an alcohol-based solvent. And on the left, you can see one of the successful films that we cut, and on the right is the process of pouring the solvent carefully from a lower height to stop any introduction of bubbles into the film. Thank you for your time, and that is my presentation.